The crystalline shapes drifting across High Commander Vera's view screen might have been beautiful if they weren't methodically tearing apart her last defensive line. The Federation outpost's shields flickered weakly against the relentless assault, crystalline shards piercing through gaps in their coverage with terrifying precision. 3 years of warfare had taught them that beauty could be deadly. Status of the civilian evacuation. Vera's voice remained steady despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. The command center of Outpost Helios had once been a testament to Federation elegance, sweeping curves of polished metal and softly glowing displays. Now emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across worried faces. 20% complete, Commander. First Officer Thex's antenna twitched with barely contained anxiety. But the crystal entities are targeting our escape vectors. We've lost 2 transport ships already. Vera watched another crystalline shard, easily the size of a small shuttle, break off from one of the larger entities and accelerate toward the station. The defense grid caught it, but the resulting explosion sent ripples through their weakening shields. The crystals were learning, adapting. Each attack more precise than the last. "Send the distress call again," she ordered, knowing it was futile. The nearest Federation fleet was 3 days away. They had hours at best. The response came not from Federation channels, but from an alert on the long-range sensors. A massive spatial distortion was forming at the edge of the system, unlike anything their instruments had ever recorded. Vera's heart skipped a beat. If the crystal entities had developed new weapons. But what emerged from the distortion wasn't crystalline. The ship was unlike anything in Federation records. Where Federation vessels were elegant curves and smooth lines, this was all sharp angles and obvious weapon emplacements. Its dark hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, broken only by the glow of massive engine ports and what appeared to be countless weapon barrels. Unknown vessel approaching. Thex reported unnecessarily. "It's mass readings, Commander. It's nearly twice the size of our largest battleships." Before Vera could respond, a transmission cut through their communications channels. The voice was deep, confident. "Federation outpost. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth ship Hyperion. We picked up your distress call. Looks like you could use some help." Earth. Humans. The species was unknown to them, but right now Vera didn't care if help came from the other side of the galaxy. "This is High Commander Vera. We have 15,000 civilians trying to evacuate and hostile forces breaching our defenses. Any assistance would be..." She trailed off as she watched the massive ship accelerate toward them. "Understood, Commander. Hyperion moving to engage. Suggest you concentrate your evacuation efforts on the far side of the station. We'll keep them busy." The human ship's approach was nothing like the precise Federation combat maneuvers Vera was familiar with. It moved like a predator, aggressive and direct. As it closed with the crystal entities, its hull began to shift. Panels rotated, revealing more weapon ports than seemed possible for a vessel its size. "Are they insane?" Thex whispered. "The crystals adapt to any weapon after a few shots. They need to stay back and analyze." The Hyperion opened fire. Not with energy weapons or gravitational distortions, but with what appeared to be solid projectiles. Massive rounds accelerated to relativistic speeds, tore through the crystal entities, shattering their seemingly impervious forms before they could adapt. Where Federation weapons were precise and elegant, this was brute force applied with terrifying efficiency. Multiple hostile contacts destroyed. The tactical officer reported, voice tinged with awe. "The crystals, they're attempting to adapt, growing denser structures, but the human vessel is varying its attack patterns. Kinetic impacts, explosive devices, some kind of molecular disassemblers." Vera watched as the Hyperion carved through the crystal formation like a blade. Its tactics made no sense by Federation standards. Too aggressive, too direct, almost primitive. But it was working. The crystal entities, used to adapting to specific types of attacks, seemed unable to cope with the sheer variety of weapons being employed against them. "Commander," Thex's voice was urgent. "The human ship is transmitting targeting data. They're highlighting safe corridors for our evacuation ships. Redirect all transports along their designated routes," Vera ordered, "and open a channel to their captain." Captain Chen's face appeared on the command screen. She was clearly human, bipedal, 2 arms, similar to many Federation species. But there was something in her eyes, a focused intensity that Vera had never seen in her peaceful, exploration-focused civilization. "Commander Vera, get your people out. We'll hold them here." "Captain, the crystals will adapt to your weapons eventually. They always do." A smile crossed Chen's face. "That's counting on us using the same weapons. Humanity learned a long time ago. You don't bring one weapon to a fight. You bring all of them. And when those stop working, you make new ones." As if to emphasize her point, the Hyperion launched what appeared to be a swarm of smaller craft, each employing different weapon systems against the increasingly confused crystal entities. Their formation, once precise and coordinated, was breaking apart under the onslaught of unpredictable attacks. "I don't understand," Vera admitted. "Your technology. Some of it seems almost primitive compared to ours. Yet you're defeating them." "Sometimes the old ways work best," Chen replied. "Your civilization evolved through peace and cooperation. Mine evolved through conflict and adaptation. We spent thousands of years fighting each other before we reached the stars. Now we're putting those lessons to better use." The last crystal entities were retreating, their usually coordinated movements erratic. The Hyperion's assault had done more than just destroy many of their number. It had confused them, disrupted their ability to analyze and adapt. "Evacuation 60% complete," Thex reported. "No losses along the human-designated corridors." Vera studied the tactical display, mind racing. The Federation had been fighting a defensive war, trying to protect their people while searching for scientific solutions. These humans, they fought differently, aggressively, unpredictably. Perhaps that was exactly what they needed. "Captain Chen," she said carefully, "once our evacuation is complete, I believe the Federation Council would be very interested in discussing an alliance." "Looking forward to it, Commander." Chen's smile widened slightly. "I think we have a lot to teach each other." As Vera watched the Hyperion continue its patrol, she realized that the galaxy had just changed. The Federation had encountered many species over its long history, but never one quite like humanity. A species that had turned its violent past into a shield for others, its primitive weapons into salvation. The crystal entities had adapted to everything the Federation had thrown at them. Now they would have to adapt to humanity. Somehow, Vera suspected that would prove much more difficult. The Federation's premier shipyard had never seen anything quite like the Earth ship Hyperion. The massive vessel loomed in the construction dock, its dark hull a stark contrast to the gleaming Federation ships surrounding it. Engineering crews swarmed around it like insects, installing new systems that merged human and Federation technology in ways neither species had imagined possible. Captain Chen stood at a viewport overlooking the work, Commander Vera at her side. The Federation officer had become the unofficial liaison between their species, having witnessed firsthand what humans could do. "Your power generation systems are incredible," Chen said, watching Federation engineers install one of their advanced reactors into the Hyperion's weapons grid. "The amount of energy you can produce in such a small space. It's going to revolutionize our delivery systems." "If by delivery systems you mean those terrifying kinetic weapons of yours," Vera replied. Her tone was light, but there was still a hint of discomfort. The Federation had always seen such weapons as crude, primitive. Now they were learning that primitive didn't mean ineffective. "Railguns powered by Federation reactors," Chen nodded. "The crystals can adapt to energy signatures, but they can't adapt to physics. A projectile moving at relativistic speeds doesn't care about their defenses." A group of Federation officers passed by, giving the Hyperion a wide berth. Despite the alliance, many were still unnerved by the human vessel's aggressive appearance. Where their ships were designed to inspire awe and peace, the Hyperion was built to inspire fear. The Council has approved full technological exchange, Vera said. Though some members needed convincing, they're still struggling with the idea of weaponizing our peaceful technologies. Chen turned to face her. Peace is worth fighting for, Commander. Sometimes the best way to preserve it is to be ready for war. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Elena Martinez, the Hyperion's chief scientist. She was practically bouncing with excitement, her tablet clutched tightly. Captain, Commander, you need to see this. We've been analyzing the crystal fragments from our last engagement, comparing them to Federation battle records. I think we found something. The data she displayed showed complex molecular structures, shifting and reforming. The crystals don't just adapt randomly. They follow patterns, mathematical sequences. Each adaptation builds on the last, but they're limited by their basic crystalline nature. Which means, Chen prompted, which means they can't adapt to everything at once. Their molecular structure can only accommodate so many changes before it becomes unstable. That's why your multi-vector attacks were so effective, Captain. You weren't giving them time to establish a stable adaptation. Vera's antenna twitched with interest. If we could force them to adapt in conflicting ways, they'd tear themselves apart. Martinez finished. But we'd need to hit them with multiple incompatible attack patterns simultaneously, more than even the Hyperion can manage alone. Chen smiled. Then it's a good thing we're not alone anymore. The next few weeks saw intense activity across the Federation fleet. Human weapon systems were installed on Federation ships, while Federation technology enhanced human vessels. Combat doctrine was rewritten, merging Federation precision with human aggression. The first test of their combined capabilities came sooner than expected. A crystal entity fleet was detected approaching a major Federation colony, larger than any previous attack group. The Hyperion led the response fleet, now sporting gleaming Federation weapon arrays alongside its traditional armament. 6 Federation cruisers accompanied it, their elegant hulls bristling with human-designed weapon mounts. They looked like beautiful predators, combining grace with lethality. All ships, combat formation, Chen ordered. The mixed fleet moved with practiced coordination, taking up positions they drilled countless times. Remember the simulations. Don't give them time to analyze any single attack pattern. The crystal entities approached in their usual perfect formation, organic crystalline shapes shifting in preparation for combat. They had adapted to every Federation weapon, every tactic, but they had never faced anything like this. Execute attack pattern Alpha, Chen commanded. All ships, multiple vectors. The Hyperion's enhanced railguns opened fire, Federation power cores giving them unprecedented velocity. Before the crystals could adapt to the kinetic impacts, Federation energy weapons struck from different angles, their beams magnified by human focusing technology. The crystal entities began to shift, their structures changing to deal with the kinetic threats. But as they did, the Federation ships launched a new type of attack, gravitic disruptors powered by human antimatter technology. The crystals tried to adapt again, their formations becoming erratic. Their structural integrity is failing, Martinez reported, monitoring the sensor data. The molecular stress is exceeding their adaptive capabilities. The first crystal entity shattered, its attempts to simultaneously counter multiple attack types tearing it apart from within. Others followed, their perfect coordination breaking down as conflicting adaptation patterns rippled through their network. Federation ships report minimal damage, Vera announced from her position on the Hyperion's bridge. She had insisted on being part of this first joint operation. The crystal entities, they seem confused. Their responses are becoming random. Chen watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The crystal fleet was in chaos, individual entities trying different adaptations and interfering with each other. Some were becoming so dense they could barely move, while others had grown so many defensive structures they were falling apart under their own mass. "This is how we win," she said quietly, "not through superior technology alone, but by combining our strengths. Your precision, our versatility. Your power, our determination. The battle ended decisively. For the first time since the crystal entities had appeared, a major fleet action concluded without a single Federation casualty. The few surviving crystals retreated in disarray, their usually perfect movements now clumsy and uncoordinated. In the aftermath, Federation and human crews celebrated together. The cultural divide that had seemed so wide weeks ago was narrowing. Federation officers spoke excitedly about new tactical possibilities, while human crews marveled at the elegance of Federation technology. "We've changed everything, haven't we?" Vera asked, watching the mixed crews interact. "We've given them something to think about," Chen replied. "The crystals evolved to counter predictable threats. Now they're facing an enemy that combines the best of two very different approaches to warfare. They'll adapt eventually. They always do. But by then we'll have something new to show them." Martine is finished, already working on her tablet. "I have some ideas about combining your phase technology with our disruption fields." Chen smiled as her scientist launched into a technical discussion with Vera. This was how species grew stronger, not by staying isolated, but by learning from each other. The Federation was learning that sometimes peace had to be protected by force, while humanity was learning that not all problems needed to be solved with violence. The crystal entities had unwittingly created something unprecedented, a partnership between a civilization that had evolved through peace and one that had evolved through war. Together, they were becoming something entirely new. And this was only the beginning. Dr. Martinez stared at the holographic display floating above her lab bench, her eyes reflecting the crystalline structures rotating before her. The Hyperion Science Lab had been upgraded with Federation technology, but she'd insisted on keeping her old microscope. Sometimes, the simplest tools revealed what advanced sensors missed. "Play it again," she told the ship's eye. The hologram reset, showing the destruction of a crystal entity from their last battle. She'd watched this recording hundreds of times, but something about it nagged at her intuition. The entity shattered under the combined assault of human and Federation weapons, its structure failing as it tried to adapt to multiple threats. But there, just before it broke apart, Martinez froze the image. "Magnify Sector 4. The hologram zoomed in on a small section of the crystal surface. As it tried to adapt, microscopic patterns had formed, not random crystalline growths, but organized structures that almost looked like Captain Chin to the science lab. She called over the comm. "And get Commander Vera. They need to see this." When the two officers arrived, Martinez was practically vibrating with excitement. "They're not just crystals," she announced without preamble. "Look at these structural patterns. They're more like circuit boards." Chen leaned in, studying the magnified image. "You're saying they're machines?" "Not exactly. More like living computers. These patterns we're seeing when they adapt. They're not just changing their physical structure. They're running programs, complex algorithms that analyze threats and calculate responses." Vera's antenna twitched thoughtfully. That would explain their ability to share adaptations so quickly. They're not just communicating. They're sharing code. Exactly. Martinez brought up more images. And like any computer, they have limitations. Processing power, memory constraints. When we hit them with multiple threats, we're not just stressing their physical structure, we're overloading their processing capacity. Chen's eyes narrowed. "Can we exploit this?" "Better." Martinez's grin was almost predatory. "We can hack them." The next hours were a blur of activity. Martinez worked with Federation computer specialists, analyzing crystal fragment data through both human and Federation methods. The combination of Federation quantum computing and human cybersecurity experience yielded insights neither side would have found alone. "Their base code is incredibly complex," a Federation tech reported, "but it follows patterns, mathematical sequences that repeat across different specimens. Like they're all running the same operating system." Martinez nodded. "Which means if we can crack it, We can affect all of them at once. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior human engineer, studying Federation communication technology, made a connection. They're adaptive algorithms. They're similar to how Federation quantum entanglement works. But instead of just sharing information, they're sharing executable code. This led to a new approach. Instead of trying to overload the crystals with weapons, they could attack their command and control structure directly. Federation quantum technology could interface with their network, while human computer virus design could disrupt their processes. The first field test came 2 weeks later. A crystal entity scout group approached a Federation outpost, likely testing defenses for a larger attack. The Hyperion waited in ambush, its new systems ready. Target locked, the tactical officer reported. Quantum interface initialized. Execute Operation Virus, Chen ordered. The Hyperion's new weapon wasn't a railgun or energy beam. It was a burst of quantum-encoded data designed to infiltrate the crystal's network. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The crystal entities continued their approach, their surfaces shifting in familiar patterns. Then they began to twitch. Interface successful, Martins reported from her station. Their adaptive algorithms are accepting our code. And now, the crystal entities suddenly stopped, their surfaces rippling chaotically. Where they normally moved with perfect coordination, now they seemed confused, their formations breaking apart. It's working, Vera breathed. Their network is compromised. Conventional weapons, fire at will, Chen commanded. The Hyperion's railguns opened up, smashing into crystal entities that could no longer adapt effectively. Their defensive patterns formed randomly, some parts trying to become harder, while others turned nearly transparent. The battle was over in minutes. The crystal entities, stripped of their greatest advantage, fell easily to the combined Human Federation assault. Analysis of the debris confirmed their success. The foreign code had completely disrupted the crystal's ability to coordinate their adaptations. This changes everything, Chen said during the post-battle briefing. But they'll adapt to this tactic too. We need to be ready with variations. Martinez nodded. I'm already working on it. Different virus patterns, multiple infection vectors. We'll give them so many different attacks to process that their entire network will crash. The news spread quickly through both fleets. Federation ships were rapidly upgraded with the new quantum virus technology, while human vessels received enhanced transmission systems. Training began immediately, teaching crews how to coordinate electronic and conventional warfare. But the true impact went beyond military advantages. Federation scientists, who had always approached problems with careful analysis, were learning to think more creatively, to try unconventional solutions. Human tactical experts, used to overwhelming force, were discovering the value of precise, targeted strikes. We're adapting too, Vera observed, watching the combined fleet prepare for their next operation. Both our species are changing, learning from each other. Chen smiled. That's the real difference between us and the crystals. They can only adapt their bodies, following pre-programmed patterns. We can adapt our thinking, come up with entirely new approaches. The crystal entities had dominated space through their ability to counter any weapon, adapt to any tactic. But they had never faced an enemy that could adapt faster than they could, not just physically, but mentally and culturally. As the combined fleet moved out, hunting for crystal entity concentrations, there was a new confidence in both human and Federation crews. They had found more than just a tactical advantage. They had discovered the strength that comes from combining different approaches, different ways of thinking. The crystal entities would adapt to this attack. Everyone knew that. But by then, humanity and the Federation would have something new ready. Together, they were becoming something neither species could have been alone. An force that could outthink, outfight, and outadapt any enemy. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, its outcome seemed certain. The crystals were about to learn that true adaptation wasn't just about changing your structure. It was about changing your entire approach to existence. The largest shipyard in Federation space had never been so busy. Dozens of vessels hung in formation, their hulls reflecting starlight as work crews swarmed around them. Federation ships were being retrofitted with human weapon systems, while human vessels received Federation quantum technology upgrades. But most interesting were the new ships being built, designs that merged both species' philosophies from the ground up. Captain Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Earth Federation ship Convergence, the first vessel designed and built by both species working together. Like its name, the ship represented the best of both worlds. Federation elegance and efficiency combined with human durability and firepower. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Commander Vera said, joining Chen at the viewport. The Federation officer had been promoted to fleet commander after their recent successes, but she still preferred working directly with her human counterpart. "Different," Chen replied, studying the vessel's lines. Where the Hyperion was all sharp angles and obvious weapon mounts, and Federation ships were smooth curves, the Convergence found a middle ground. Its hull was streamlined but purposeful, hiding powerful weapons behind retractable panels. Like everything else these days, a holographic display activated nearby, showing tactical data from the front lines. The crystal entities were falling back across multiple sectors, their usual perfect coordination disrupted by the quantum virus attacks. But they weren't defeated. They were changing. "New crystal formations detected in Sector 7, reported Dr. Martinez, who had been quietly analyzing the data. "They're trying to isolate portions of their network, creating firewalls, essentially, attempting to limit the spread of our viral attacks." "Adapting," Chen nodded. "As expected. But they're also making themselves vulnerable. Isolated units can't share adaptations as effectively." Vera's antenna twitched thoughtfully. They're being forced to choose between network security and tactical flexibility, a concept they've never had to deal with before. The three officers moved to the Convergence's new tactical center, where Federation and human crew members worked side by side. The room itself showed how far they'd come. Federation holographic displays merged seamlessly with human tactical interfaces, creating an unprecedented level of battlefield awareness. "The latest combat data is fascinating," Martinez continued, bringing up detailed analyses. "The crystal entities are developing new defensive patterns. Instead of trying to adapt to everything at once, they're specializing. Some focus on countering kinetic weapons, others on energy attacks." "Division of labor," Chen mused. "They're learning from us in their own way, but it makes them predictable. If we can identify which crystals are specialized for what, we can target them with weapons they're not prepared for," Vera finished. "Our tactical flexibility against their specialized defenses." The tactical display updated with new information from the front. A massive crystal entity fleet had been detected moving toward a major Federation production center. But unlike their previous perfectly coordinated approaches, this formation was different. Layers of specialized units protecting each other. "They're evolving their tactics," Chen observed. "Not just their physical forms. This is new." Martinez nodded excitedly. "They're capable of learning beyond their base programming. The pressure we're putting on them is forcing them to develop new strategies. But that also means they can make mistakes," Vera said, "choices that leave them vulnerable." The combined fleet mobilized with practiced efficiency. The Convergence took its place at the head of the formation, flanked by both Federation and human vessels. Each ship now carried a mix of weapons and tactics, able to switch between different attack patterns at a moment's notice. "All ships, battle formation Delta," Chen ordered. The fleet moved into position, demonstrating a level of coordination that would have been impossible months ago. Federation precision combined with human tactical flexibility created movements that were both elegant and unpredictable. The crystal entities met them with their new formation, specialized units arranged in defensive layers. It was a good strategy, but it had a fundamental flaw. It was still predictable. "Execute Operation Chameleon," Chen commanded. The combined fleet suddenly shifted tactics. Ships that had been broadcasting energy weapon signatures switched to kinetic attacks. Vessels that appeared to be carrying viral weapons launched conventional missiles instead. The crystal entities carefully arranged specialized defenses found themselves facing exactly the wrong types of attacks. Their formation is breaking down, Martins reported, watching the tactical display. The specialized units are trying to swap positions, but they can't coordinate fast enough. The battle that followed was unlike anything seen before in the war. The combined fleet moved like a single organism, constantly shifting tactics and attack patterns. Crystal entities optimized for energy defense shattered under kinetic impacts, while those specialized for physical protection melted under focused energy beams. They're trying to adapt, Vera observed, but they can't decide whether to maintain their specializations or return to general defenses. The confusion is spreading through their network. The crystal formation collapsed into chaos. Individual units tried different strategies, but without effective coordination, they only interfered with each other. The combined fleet pressed its advantage, systematically targeting each specialized group with its most vulnerable weapons. In the aftermath, as recovery teams collected crystal debris for analysis, Chen and Vera stood in the Convergence's tactical center, reviewing the battle data. "They're getting smarter," Chen said, "developing new strategies, trying to counter our tactics, but they're still bound by their nature, their need to find perfect solutions." "While we embrace imperfection," Vera replied. "The ability to make mistakes, learn from them, try new approaches, it's something they may never truly understand." Martinez joined them, her tablet displaying preliminary analysis of the debris. "The really interesting part is how they're changing on a fundamental level. The pressure we're putting on them is forcing them to evolve faster than ever before. They're becoming something new." "So are we," Chen said, looking around at the mixed crew working together seamlessly. Federation officers had adopted human tactical aggression while maintaining their precision. Human crew members had learned to appreciate the elegance of Federation technology and planning. The war was changing everyone involved. The crystal entities were evolving beyond their original programming, developing new strategies and capabilities. But the combined human Federation force was evolving faster, not just in technology and tactics, but in how they thought about problems and solutions. As the Convergence moved to its next assignment, its hybrid crew working with practiced efficiency, it was clear that this conflict had become more than just a war. It was an evolution of both thought and action, forcing all sides to adapt in ways they never imagined possible. The combined fleet gathered at the edge of known space, the largest assembly of ships in Federation history. At its center, the Convergence hung in formation with the Hyperion, their contrasting designs representing the journey that had brought them here. Federation vessels with their elegant curves now bristled with human weapon systems, while angular human warships pulsed with Federation quantum technology. Captain Chen stood on the Convergence's bridge, studying the tactical display where a giant crystal structure loomed. After months of tracking quantum signals and analyzing battle debris, they'd finally found it. The central node of the crystal entity network, a massive crystalline structure larger than anything they'd encountered before. "Final system checks complete," reported Martinez from her science station, now a unique blend of Federation sensors and human analytical tools. "The quantum mapping confirms it. This structure is the source of their coordination network. Every adaptation, every tactical change, it all originates here." Fleet Commander Vera nodded, her antenna tense with anticipation. "The crystal entities are already responding. Long-range sensors detect multiple defense fleets converging on our position." The tactical display updated, showing waves of crystal ships moving to protect their central node. Their formations were more sophisticated than ever, specialized units arranged in complex patterns, each protecting the other's vulnerabilities. They had learned, evolved, but so had the combined fleet. "All ships, battle stations," Chen ordered. "Initiate Operation Endgame." The combined fleet split into predetermined groups, each a careful mix of Federation and human vessels. The crystal entities responded by forming their own battle groups. attempting to counter the fleet's known tactics. But this time, the Alliance had something new. "Launch the probes," Vera commanded. Hundreds of small devices, products of both human and Federation engineering, streamed from the fleet's ships. They looked like standard sensor probes, but carried a special payload, a quantum virus unlike anything they'd used before. "The crystal entities aren't reacting to the probes," Martins reported. "Their electronic warfare suites must recognize them as standard reconnaissance devices." Chen allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the old tricks work best. Begin Phase 2. The combined fleet suddenly accelerated, each battle group executing complex maneuvers that seemed to make no tactical sense. Crystal ships moved to intercept them, their specialized formations ready to counter any conventional attack. "Probes in position," Martins announced. "Quantum network interface active. Now." The virus hidden in the probes activated, but instead of attacking the crystal entities directly, it did something far more insidious. It began broadcasting their own coordination signals, but slightly out of sync with the original network. The effect was immediate and devastating. Crystal ships attempting to coordinate their defenses received conflicting commands. Specialized units trying to protect each other found their timing disrupted by milliseconds, just enough to create gaps in their coverage. "Their network is destabilizing," Martins reported excitedly. "The quantum interference is cascading through their command structure." The combined fleet struck. Federation energy weapons powered by human reactors tore through confused crystal formations. Human kinetic weapons enhanced by Federation targeting systems found weak points in destabilized defenses. But most importantly, each ship fought independently, their crews making tactical decisions without relying on perfect coordination. "The central node is responding," Vera observed. Through the tactical display, they watched the massive crystalline structure pulse with energy. "It's trying to reassert control over the network." As expected, Chen nodded. "Time for Phase 3. The Convergence and Hyperion broke from the main fleet, driving straight toward the central node, while other ships kept its defenders occupied. Both vessels had been specially modified for this moment, their systems tuned to execute a plan that would have been impossible months ago. "Node defense grid activating," Tactical reported. "Multiple weapon systems, unlike anything we've seen before." The central node's surface bristled with crystalline weapons, each one more advanced than those they'd encountered in battle. This was where all crystal entity evolution began, the source of their adaptations. "All power to quantum disruption fields," Chen ordered. Federation technology combined with human engineering created an envelope around both ships, distorting the very fabric of space-time. The node's weapons fired, but in the disrupted space around the ships, their perfect targeting was thrown off. Beams that should have struck with precision were bent away, while physical projectiles moved in unpredictable patterns. "We're within range," Martins announced. "Initiating final sequence." The Convergence and Hyperion launched their payloads, not weapons, but specially designed transmission devices. As they struck the node's surface, they began broadcasting a signal that was both elegant and brutal in its simplicity. "What are we showing them?" Vera asked, watching the node's surface begin to ripple and shift. "Everything," Martins replied. "Every adaptation they've ever made. Every counter we've developed. Every victory and defeat from the entire war. But scrambled out of sequence, filled with contradictions." The node's perfect crystalline surface began to fracture as it tried to process the flood of conflicting information. Its attempts to adapt created patterns that fought against each other, evolutionary dead ends that consumed resources and processing power. "Their entire network is losing coherence," Tactical reported. "Crystal ships throughout the system are going dormant." The central node's attempts to restore order only made things worse. Each new adaptation it tried to implement conflicted with existing patterns, creating cascade failures throughout its structure. The crystal entities had evolved to seek perfect solutions. Now the drive for perfection was destroying them. "All ships, commence final attack," Chen ordered. The combined fleet struck as one, pouring fire into the destabilized node. Federation energy weapons shattered crystalline structures while human kinetic weapons delivered the killing blow. The node's destruction was spectacular. As it broke apart, the quantum network that had coordinated all crystal entities collapsed. Throughout the system, crystal ships went dark, their perfect coordination lost, their ability to adapt crippled. In the aftermath, as Federation and human crews began the task of containing the remnants, Chen and Vera stood in the Convergence's observation deck, watching recovery teams at work. They never understood what they were fighting, Vera said quietly. They evolved to seek perfect solutions, perfect adaptation. But the universe doesn't work that way. Chen nodded. Sometimes the best solutions are imperfect. Sometimes strength comes from being able to accept that, to work with it rather than against it. Martinez joined them, her tablet displaying analysis of the node's remains. The really fascinating thing is what we've learned from them. Their quantum networking technology, their adaptation algorithms. Stripped of the drive for perfection, there's so much potential there. The victory had changed more than just the tactical situation. The Federation had learned that sometimes peace had to be protected by force, while humanity had discovered that not all problems needed to be solved through conflict. Together, they had become something new, a civilization that could be both peaceful and strong, both elegant and practical. As the combined fleet prepared to return home, the wreckage of the central node floating behind them, it was clear that this war had evolved all of them. The crystal entities had forced both humanity and the Federation to adapt, to change, to grow. In trying to perfect themselves, they had inadvertently helped create something far more powerful, a union of different species, different philosophies, working together to create something greater than either could have achieved alone. The war was over, but the evolution it had sparked was just beginning.